Hello, I'm Michael McConkey. Welcome to Reaction Norm, the world's leading podcast video show on biology and culture and politics, or at least so I'm claiming until someone shows me otherwise. And I am joined this week by Patricia Vino. How you doing, Patricia?
I am fabulous, Michael. How are you?
Very good, very good. So today we're going to have a little episode where we're going to return to our original stomping grounds. Our very first substantive episode was a little sort of critical review of something on the BBC, and we're going back to the BBC. And some might accuse us of punching down in this case. That may well be the case, but this article just sort of annoyed me. So I suggested maybe we could talk about it today. It's a and I'm not sure. I don't know if you know this or not. Like these people who write like these blog posts for like the BBC. I mean, like, do they actually like work for the BBC? Are they paid to do this? I don't even know what the story is here. Do you know what goes on here?
I have no idea, but I would agree that it doesn't quite seem to hold up to as high journalistic scrutiny as other BBC reporting that I've seen. So.
I don't know. So I mean, you know, we're picking. Today we may be picking on some little twit who, you know, what she's doing. I don't know, you know, but I mean, but I guess the reason why I wanted to do it is not for this particular piece. It's because this is the kind of thing that you see all the time, even in the so-called serious, you know, journalism and serious newspaper articles, right? The actual hard copy papers, you know, will have these kind of articles in them making these kind of claims. And so this one actually came into my Twitter account. We were thinking of something to do this week. We wanted to do something a little more current and newsy. And so this came into my my Twitter feed this week, and I thought, oh yeah, this looks like this could be just the thing, right? And I thought it was published in March. So that's good. Okay, that's like right from the headlines. However, the problem is, when I looked a little more closer, I realized that I'm going to do screen share here while I talk. As I looked a little more closely, I realized that is this good? Share your screen. Share. All right. There we go. I realized that, in fact, this article was actually published way back in last year, March. So it's like a year old here. But that's fine. It's like I said, it's not for this particular article that I'm concerned about. It's the kind of article, the kind of thing, the kind of claims that are being made that sort of annoy me. So I thought what we do then is we just sort of read through it. It's not very long, and I have some comments to make along the way. And Patricia, you just jump right in when you have anything that strikes you.
Will do.
Okay, so here we have, apparently, have you seen American Pie? There's all these references to American Pie. I haven't seen this movie. I assume this is a clip from that movie or a shot from this movie. Isn't this guy supposed to be in American Pie, I think? I don't even.
Yeah, I think I saw it maybe when I was in high school. It's not maybe the best movie I've ever seen in my life, but I guess it was a bit of a cultural thing for a while.
It has a real cult following, I know, but I've actually have never seen it. So
I would not take 2 hours out of your life.
Okay. Well, you'd be amazed the stuff that I take 2 hours of my life to watch, you know, but I haven't gotten to this point yet. Anyways, so this is Katrina White here, whoever she is. She looks very perky. So and of course we don't know, like in the actual, you know, in the media, newspapers, like the writers don't actually choose their own headlines. I don't know if in like a blog post like this they choose their headline or not, but the headline is pretty extreme, right? Science was wrong. Women are just as up for casual sex as men are. You know, like you've got to, like, what, you can't just say that women are more up for casual sex than we thought. No, they're just as up for casual sex as men. Okay, well, this is a pretty bold statement. So let's see what the case is. All right. So to quote from that infinitely wise movie, American Pie, if you want to know the truth about the number of sexual partners a woman has had, multiply whatever response she gives by 3. When asking a man, divide his answer by the same number. So Jessica, Tara Reid's a sexually sage pal in American Pie, calls this the rule of 3, an exact science, consistent as gravity. It even has its own Urban Dictionary page. Well, there you go. So there's that. here we go. Here's the science. Okay, so back in 1859, Charles Darwin theorized that men are just biologically programmed to be promiscuous, while women are the naturally chaste sex. And while mores might be changing with time, it's still the conventional wisdom to where men are studs, women are slut shamed. So in her book, Inferior, the science journal Sani, I don't know, how would you say this? Sani, I don't know, I guess something like that. Sets out to examine the scientific research behind these assumptions. So we've now got some twit millennial blogger writing about what a science journal says. So I'm already totally impressed with the authority of our sources here. So she tells me, Sanini tells Katrina here, that over the last 30 to 40 years, a more accurate portrait is emerging than the one before, which was based on assumptions and stereotypes rather than scientific stats and evidence. And it's one that suggests that women are just as open to casual sex as men are. Choosier, yes, but no less open to it. So, I mean, that already seems to me like a contradiction in terms, right? I mean, how can you say they're both no less open to it, but they're also choosier? I don't know. That already seems like a weird contradiction, but there will be more of that sort of thing to come. So Darwin's stereotypes have had a long life. And so they jump. I guess they jump from 1858 to 1978. So that's a long life, I guess, if with not many touchstones along the way. A 1978 issue of Playboy carried the story: "Do men cheat on their women? New science says yes." Whatever, I don't know. When Bill Clinton had his infamous affair, the New Yorker defended his behavior on the basis of this evolutionary psychology in an article titled "Boys Will Be Boys." But Sani, whatever her name is, tells me about a 2013 study. This is interesting, I think. A 2013 study in Germany, a repeat of a 1970s experiment in which, and they say a group of men and women approached strangers. It wasn't a group of men. It was individual men and individual women who have approached strangers on a university campus, I believe, the original studies, to ask whether the approach would have sex. The resounding response in the initial experiment was a yes from men and a no from women. And after we finish the article, I'll go through some of that evidence. It's not talking about one study. We're talking about many, many studies that have found the same thing over and over again. So she says here, from this, the glove fit. Men were reliably more up for it. But as Sani points out, there were so many additional factors, like the threat of violence or social stigma. So in 2013, the study was repeated in a safe lab environment. Men and women were shown pictures of potential partners and asked whether they wanted to sleep with them. Both sexes said yes. The men ultimately chose more partners than the women, but they were equally open to the idea of casual sex. As Sani summarizes, the females were choosy but not chaste. Well, a few things about this. So I've been reading here for a while. Is there anything that you want to throw in, Patricia?
Oh, not specifically. I like that some of the language choices, like Darwin's stereotypes, like not his science, not his findings. It's right. Like some sort of stereotypes that we haven't been able to get rid of.
That's right.
There's a lot of funny language in there, but I want to let you kind of get right into it. So
okay, we've got this position here that so he said that more partners than women. Then this isn't the safe laboratory setting, right? Men chose more partners than women, but they were equally open to the idea of casual sex. I guess she means women were equally open to the idea of casual sex. Well, they obviously weren't equally as open if men chose more partners than women, right? Even in the controlled environment, men were more willing to say, yes, I'll sleep with this stranger than the women were saying. So even the claim that it's it's the same, there's no difference, even that's not true. And this idea that the same effect relating these people in a way, I mean, this may well be, look at this weird picture. Do you see this weird picture of this guy like humping the truck?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is this from American Pie too? I don't know what we're doing here.
So.
I don't. Anyways, this idea that somehow you're getting the same results asking in this quote unquote safe setting of a laboratory as you do like out walking around a university campus. This is not the same thing. Like you could make the claim here from this. You could say this is evidence that women will fantasize about casual sex. Almost, not as much, because they say men said yes more still, even in this setting. You might say that women are more inclined to fantasize about casual sex in a safe setting, but that's a little different thing from being willing to do it, from willing to say yes when approached by a total stranger on a university campus.
Right. And I would also argue that she says that women might be worried about other factors, the threat of violence and whatnot. But if men aren't worried about those factors, then I think that would go to show that maybe that they are willing to take more risks.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And of course, the other thing they don't mention, she doesn't mention here, of course, is the rather big risk of pregnancy, which might be kind of the whole point here, right?
Right.
It's you're not risking pregnancy when you're sitting in a laboratory looking at pictures. Let's just this guy out there. Okay. So that thinking, that sort of like stereotypical thinking, she says, is still alive and well today. But Sanini argues that goes all the way back to Darwin's own social context. It fit the female Victorian stereotype that Darwin knew. In the Victorian era, Sanini says, female sexuality has been suppressed for so long, the scientists didn't even question whether this modesty and meekness might not be biological. So,
it seems like she's saying that there's some sort of like epigenetic or some sort of like scar that is multi-generational, that if you suppress women for long enough that I don't know, I think that there's something about saying that they've been suppressed for so long that could be, that they can't like change their strategy, or that you don't sort of have any autonomy for what sort of like sexual behavior you engage in.
Possibly.
Some of the language, it just bothers me.
I didn't even think about that. That could be read into, because the thing that struck me about this is that, a few words of context here, right? I mean, like these ideas that Darwin came up with about the differences of the proclivities of the sexes based on their biology, right? This emerged out of what's usually not as widely known in his later work in sexual selection. The general public in general knows him for his work on natural selection, Origin of the Species, but he actually wrote a lot more eventually on sexual selection. And it was in that context that he made these claims. But the interesting thing was that these people, I guess it's basically assuming that Katrina is accurately describing Sanini's here, going against the assumptions of his time. Actually, there was a lot of hostility to it. The theory of sexual selection is that they are largely because women chose them that way, right? And there was a lot of hostility to the idea that women would have this kind of autonomous role or have so much influence in evolutionary outcomes. Right. This is, and now I'm not a historian of this. I primarily get this from my recollections of reading the description of it by Geoffrey Miller in The Mating Mind. His claim was that in fact there was a huge hostility among Victorian society to this idea that women had this influential autonomous role in evolution. So it's kind of like they're kind of getting the shoe on the wrong foot, as it were. I mean, it is true that Victorian attitudes about female sexuality played a role, but it wasn't that Darwin was perpetuating them. If anything, he was kind of going against them. So, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well said. No, I was just said that's a good point.
So, anyways, she goes on here. She says that women around Darwin didn't work. They didn't have access to higher education or broader social opportunities. Darwin just assumed that he was seen was biological, not cultural, not ignoring the fact that it's sexually repressed by patriarchal society for thousands of years, blah, blah, blah. So, so we've already sort of partially addressed that. But there's a couple of other finally they get into a little more specific, towards the end here, a couple of specific claims. And these are interesting for what they do and don't say. So she says, there are several non-Western societies whose practices suggest conventional female sexual behavior is indeed cultural rather than biological. So there's several, but she's only going to give us one. She says, take the Himba, an indigenous society in Namibia, where it's the cultural norm for women to have affairs with other men while married. Okay, so several things strike me about this. So the first thing, we got this link to the Himba, right? So you open up this link, and slow computer here. Anyways, when the link to the Himba opens up, I will assure you, because I have already opened it up and read it, that it says nothing at all about female sexual strategies, right? It says nothing about it at all. It certainly doesn't say anything about them having affairs and their whatever, right? The only thing that was I actually found mildly interesting here is it does say that it's an interesting society because they have both matriline and patrilines at the same time. And the matriline controls inheritance of material wealth. Well, let me just highlight this. Matriline controls inheritance of material wealth, including livestock. A son inherits from his mother's brother, not from his father. So that's an interesting thing, because in those kind of societies, those are societies usually where parents are having an extremely high influence on these kind of outcomes, because the parents would prefer the resources that they've accumulated to definitely go to their offspring, and they can be much more confident of that if their offspring is the inheritance is from their daughter rather than from their sons, because they can't be 100% sure that their son's children are their children, right? Because of the problem of paternal uncertainty, right? So these are societies where on the one hand, it could be that, yes, there's a tendency for the women to go and step out with another man. So this would be a society where we wouldn't want our family wealth going to our son's children. We'd rather going to our daughter's children, kind of thing, right? But of course, on the other hand, it can work the other way around too, right? Is that insofar as the kept in the family and passed on along certain genetic lines or more certain lineage lines, then there's less incentive for the husband, say, to enforce conditions that mitigate paternal uncertainty, and therefore maybe leaving it more possible, less of a conflict if the women are engaging in more extramarital sexual. That could be true. It's unknown, but I mean, like I said, the article she cites actually says nothing about the actual claim that's made at all. So you have to maybe kind of intuit it, but it sounds like interesting people. But of course, the other thing is that, I mean, this could be the case, right? I mean, of course, you could have individual societies where women are more or less open to non-monogamous relationships, right? I mean, there's always going to be outliers and everything, right? So okay, maybe this is something, maybe it's not. Certainly the way it's presented amount to much of anything. And then seeing that women aren't eager for sex and that they don't want more than one sexual partner at a time. So first of all, I don't know that this profoundly challenges it at all, but maybe. And then she jumps next to, here's the Sex and the City lady. And here we jump down to, this is perhaps the most striking argument against the idea of women being naturally more monogamous than men is the fact that societies that champion female chastity have to police women's sexual behavior, blah, blah, blah. So again, these are not, to me, consistent. Challenging the theory that women aren't eager for one sexual partner, as the more striking the idea that women are being naturally monogamous. I mean, women can be naturally more monogamous than men and yet still not be 100% monogamous, right? It's just like all these sort of like logical problems that.
And you're obviously going to get a continuum too, right?
Exactly.
You're going to have like a lot of women who are going to engage in a lot of different strategies.
Even though I'm not even sure I'd say continuum, but I mean, it's going to be multimodal or something, right? I mean, even if you get a majority of women sort of clustered at one end of a spectrum, right? There's still going to be lots of outliers spread out across there, right? That's what you're referring to by
that's what I meant, right? Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're going to have that, and then they're just almost at the end here. So again, this is quoting Saini. One of the big examples I give is FGM, female genital mutilation. There's no other purpose to such a violent act committed on so many millions of women than to make it too painful for them to enjoy sex, to keep them faithful to their husbands. So I haven't studied this topic in any depth, but I would suggest to people watching this might want to go back a few episodes to the episode I did with Charles on female intersexual competition. And we were reading from some research there. I think it was Somalia. It was one of these places where there's a lot of FGM. And they were making the claim that, first of all, that these rituals are completely female rituals. They're completely conducted by women. Men are not allowed to participate in them in any more. They claim to have research to show that the majority of men preferred wives who were not, as they'll sometimes call it, circumcised, right? So it's not particularly clear that this actually is a process of, the patriarchy suppressing female sexuality. This might be something else. And as I said, we talked about it in the context of a female intersexual competition, and it might be that it's more about that than it has anything to do with patriarchy. So again, just these sort of simple claims without any resort to the actual research on the topic. It's just it's like the knee-jerk reaction all the time. Well, this has to be explained by patriarchy. Is often much more complicated explanations involved. So she finishes off. Sanini concludes, every society has double morals when it comes to men and women and sexual behavior. We just need to be careful to look at context before jumping to biology as an explanation of how we behave, which actually that last little bit almost like softens the earlier part, which seems to be this like science is wrong. So less so. Hold on, let me just get my image back. There we go. I got my glasses on. Okay, so I was reading. So all right. So I have things to say about this. They're interested in the science. So I have some science I want to go through on this. But first, any general remarks on that, Patricia?
I mean, nothing groundbreaking. I mean, it just seems like, as usual, they really are like oversimplifying everything. It sort of makes it seem like, surprise, women have sex drives, you know what I mean? And are willing to engage in sex. And it's like, you needed to do a study for this? Like, it just seems like they're really oversimplifying a lot of positions. And that always bothers me, because I don't think that you can really get much for firm conclusions out of things when you like drastically oversimplify the situation. So
yeah, and I will concede, like if you're comparing to Darwin, right? I mean, obviously, once contraception enters the picture, then that is likely to have some impact on the willingness of engage in mutual or extramarital sex, just because the potential costs. I mean, the big costs is always the danger of getting pregnant. Once you can reliably reduce the danger of that cost, then I suspect that will have some impact on differences in terms of female attitudes and behaviors around casual sex and extramarital sex. So I'm right off the top, right? Like, and they don't say anything about that, by the way. They don't even mention that in the article, right?
I mean, the problem is I think that we've been assuming something about women that we've had no way to really study And, like, we don't actually know how many women were having extramarital affairs. I think that it's an interesting thing that's coming out of all this, like 23andMe and stuff, is people are finding out that their family trees are a little bit different than what maybe they thought they were. And being that somebody had an affair, your father might not be who you thought you were. Anyways, going back to there. So I would just say that I know that some people have tried to study this or whatever, but we don't really know. I think that this is probably the type of thing that people would be reticent to self-report extramarital affairs, or if they suspected that they had had a child with another man or something. So this is just one thing that we don't really know what the baseline was.
Yeah, and of course there's been long the argument that that there's fitness benefits to women having affairs, and some of the science I'm going to go through in just a minute indicates that this appears to be the case, or there appears to be good reason to believe this is the case. And of course, the idea here is that the mating, the literature on mating breaks it down into long-term mating and short-term mating, right?
Right.
And there's less. I'm not saying there's none by any means, but there is less distinction for males between long-term and short-term. But there's a pretty dramatic difference in terms of preferences around female preferences around long and short-term mating. Is that females, when they're looking for long-term mates, they're looking for someone who's going to husband, a good provider, or someone who's kind, someone who's going to be able to to help raise the children, both emotionally, psychologically, as well as financially, these kind of things. But it turns out that when women are ovulating, they're actually attracted to different kinds of men, much more masculine men, much more dominant men, I think. And there it seems as though there's sort of a predisposal to pursue better genes, right? Genes that are going to provide qualities to their sons that are actually going to be the same qualities that are going to be attractive to other women when they're ovulating, right?
Right.
So anyways, but there's a bunch of literature on this.
No, and that's interesting. And I feel like this sort of research we don't talk about as much. When you talk about men, if you were going to kind of be overly simplistic, it's like, oh, they're just, like slaves to their sex drive. It's biological, whatever. But when it comes to women, you always sort of like, the picture is always that, no, they think it through, how this could affect, and they only make decisions based on sort of this like logical thought out process. So I think it's just important to like point out that, sex drives do function the same, like women, you know what I mean, right?
No, I don't. Tell me what you mean. No, okay. No, I know what you mean. Yeah, maybe actually we should just take a moment here to say, because this is such a ill-informed article. But again, I think it's typical for this kind of thing, how badly informed it is. So first of all, they base their whole case on sort of, Darwin's sexual selection, like 100 and whatever, 70 years or whatever it is ago now. And the real gold standard for this stuff is not Darwin from the descent of man. The real gold standard is actually Robert Trivers in the 1970s with parental investment theory. Right. And there the point was, and maybe for those who don't know anything about this, a few words of explanation might be helpful. The idea there is that the parent who invests more in the creation and raising of the offspring is going to become effectively a scarce resource that the other sex is going to fight over. Now, this is usually going to be the scarce resource is usually going to be females, right? Because and it starts off with biology, right? Because women produce these huge gametes. It's the largest cell in the female body. It's full of nutrition to help sustain the zygote and the embryo in its early development. It's got all the organelles that's going to go into it and all this, right?
They're finite. You only get a certain number, and that's it.
That's right. And it's like a human female, I think, produces maybe 300 or something in her entire lifetime, right? So, and they're available like approximately once a month for approximately 20 years of your life, sort of thing, right? Whereas, you know, these sperm are, you know,
sperm are cheap.
Sperm are real cheap, right? You know, there's millions of them available all the time, and you know, they're, you know, yeah, I mean, you know, you know, and you can do the sort of simple math, right? Of, you know, if you had a society, you had one society with you know, 100 women and one man, and, you know, another society with 100 men and one woman, right? I mean, you just do the math, right? You know, over the course of a year, how many children might the 100 women, one man society have? I mean, in theory, it could have 100 children, right? It could, right? You know, the 100 men and one woman, I mean, is only going to have one child. And probably a lot of the men will have killed each other trying to get access to the woman, right? You know, so you know, so this is because at the biological level, and these eggs are female produced, are literally a scarce resource. It creates a cascade where each step of the way, females are more invested in making sure that this egg, if it's fertilized, comes to fruition, because if she loses it, you know, there's, especially if it was, you know, a well-chosen mate, presumably, then, you know, there's a big cost to going back to that. Whereas, you know, if she loses it in pregnancy, or loses it after it's a year or two old or something, right? She's, you know, wasted years, right? That she's invested in this single child. Whereas in that amount of time, the same father of that child could have fathered 25, 30 other kids, in theory. I'm not saying likely, but I mean, could have, right? You know, so this is why there's this constant cascade, right? But the point to emphasize here for Trevor's argument is that this actually, even though it appears to be a sex-based argument, it's not a sex-based argument. It's about parental investment. And it turns out that there's at least several dozen, maybe as many as 50 different species that have been found, that even though they're anisogamous sexual species, and you have exactly this beginning, sexual beginning that we're talking about, for some reason, due to some kind of whatever unique ecological environmental conditions existed for that species, the males became the higher investing species. And these are often birds. And often what happens then is that it's the males who are actually sit on the eggs to hatch them. And they're often doing this for weeks. And while they're doing this, the females have now gone off and are making more babies of other males, right? So in that case, it's the males who are the higher investors. It's exactly what you would, as you know, Trivers predicts, when you have one of the parent being the higher investing. In this case, are physically larger, are physically more aggressive, actually get in physical fights with other, you know, intrasexually over access to the males. And the males are the ones that are choosy. The males are the ones that are exercising more discretion because their investment is higher, and there's more cost to them if it doesn't work out in the long run. So it's about the parent that invests more or less has to do with which one is more promiscuous and which one is more choosy. It's just that most of the time, for biological reasons, it is the female that in fact is the higher investing parent. So do you want to say anything about that?
No, you said it really, really well.
Okay, so that sets us up then as understanding in a little more intelligent, sophisticated way about what's actually going on here. And why, in fact, you would expect females to be more cautious about their sexual choices. I just wanted then to let's see if I can look around. It must look so weird with my camera. I'm looking around here. So you guys can't see this, but I've put something up on my screen so I can go through a bit of the research here. So here's some of the research on this. All right, so first a paper published by David Schmidt in 2005. Okay, so this is a paper that had 100 researchers involved who translated this survey into their language. So first of all, in 100 different languages. It's a cross-cultural survey of over 16,000 people. In fact, I think it was close to 17,000 people from what they call 10 major regions of the world, 52 countries across 6 continents, okay? So this is pretty extensive stuff, right? So sex differences and short-term mating desires. I'm just gonna move the camera here a little bit so I can see better. Sorry about this, folks. I don't know what that, let me see. me see how that looks. Does that look? That looks okay. All right. So I'll go back. Sex differences in short-term mating desires, particularly desire for sexual variety, are cross-culturally universal. So regardless of statistical techniques used to evaluate them, regardless of the participant's current relationship status or sexual orientation, married or single, heterosexual or homosexual, men consistently desire larger numbers of sexual partners than women do. Among those men and women who are actively pursuing short-term mates, over 50% of men and less than 20% of women desire more than one sexual partner in the next month. So that's a study in 100 different languages, over 16,000 people, over 52 countries, right? So, pretty broad stuff. They also found that men universally agree to have sex after less time has elapsed than women do. Men from all world regions expend more effort on seeking brief sexual relationships than women do. And across all cultures, nearly 25% of married men, but only 10% of married women reported that they are actively seeking short-term extramarital partners. So that's pretty damning stuff for the claim that women are just as up to casual sex as men are. Also then there's these approach studies. So I want to just go through some of this stuff. And by the way, feel free to interrupt and jump in whenever you want, Patricia.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So they talk about this, or they, whatever, the two, the science journalists and our blogger, whoever, they're talking about these studies where strangers approach you on the street. I think originally it was on the university campuses. So the original study of this was by Clark and Hatfield in the 1970s. So then exactly what, as described, they have the Confederates approach college students on American campuses and asked if they'd like to have sex. And they found that 75% of men agreed to have sex with a complete stranger, and zero women agreed to this. So they redid the study again in the 80s and found almost exactly the same results. In 2010, Hald and Holge Olkensen replicated these findings in Denmark. They found slightly smaller numbers, but it's the same basic outcome. 59% of men said that 59% of single men said that they would have sex with a stranger, and 0% of single women agreed to the proposition. In these names, in a 2011 paper, manipulated the physical attractiveness of the Confederates. So in this paper, the Confederates were chosen to be either particularly attractive or what they call average attractiveness. So asked if they would have sex with a stranger, 83% of men agreed to have sex with a highly attractive woman, and 60% of men agreed to have sex with a woman of average attractiveness. For women, 3% agreed to have sex with a highly attractive man, but no woman, 0%, agreed to have sex with a man of average attractiveness. So, and I just got so much more here. This, by the way, I'm actually working on a course that I'm going to be teaching in a few months on sex differences around these things. And I'm just going through some of the literature that I've accumulated around this. What is this one? Okay, well, we can skip this stuff. I mean, this is the stuff that I was talking about before. Is that when women choose to pursue or are interested in short-term mating strategies, they tend to pursue qualities that seem to suggest good genes that they can pass on to their offspring. Yeah, you're going to say something?
I mean, not really. I was thinking about some of the language around some of the studies, and I mean, this is not a good criticism. I'll just preface it with that. But I do wonder, I think that there is something with an intention of, they're asking women how many were looking for some sort of extramarital thing. And like this, I don't have any evidence to support this or whatever, but I would guess that probably most often when women engage in extramarital affairs, it's not that they went out looking for it, it's that they met somebody and like some sort of relationship happened, as opposed to be like, oh, I'm like, you know what I mean? So there's some things in like, I think that it's a good, like the study's probably good, but I do think it has its limitations. Well, and I don't know how you'd kind of study the other side of it, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting, right? Because I mean, yeah, I suspect there's probably something to that, but I mean, that kind of fits into the argument that women are more circumspect, right? I mean,
right?
You know, men are willing to go and have sex with total strangers. That tells you something, right? You know, whereas women, yeah, they're willing to engage in casual sex or marital sex, but they're going to be a lot more circumspect about who they're choosing to do it with, right?
Right.
So so I think this is a pretty big to say that women are just as up for casual sex as men. I don't think so, right?
Well, I think it depends on the caliber of men.
Well, it depends on the caliber.
Right.
Yeah,
like,
sure. It depends on the caliber of men. It depends on the safety of the situation, of course.
Right.
But that's the whole point. Because those limitations exist, you can't make the claim that they're just as up for it as men are.
Right. Absolutely.
Men don't have those qualifications, right? Men are willing to have sex with a total stranger, especially if she's attractive, right?
Right.
So I mean, so there are very real differences. I mean, I think it was important clarification to make, but that clarification doesn't go against the main claim that I'm making here. It kind of supports the main claim that I'm making.
Right. No, it does.
So what's this other thing? Oh yeah, so this comes back to the whole thing about, this is a article by Larson's et al. 2013. It's called Changes in Women's Feelings About Their Romantic Relationships Across the Ovulatory Cycle. And this is, I thought this was quite interesting. And again, this comes into a lot of people have made, a lot of researchers around these topics have made the claim that in fact, where women's short-term mating becomes stimulated, the tendency towards short-term mating and seeking sexually attractive partners is around ovulation, which again, if you're thinking of it in terms of the selfish gene fitness, makes sense, right? Because if I got this nice guy who's going to look after the children, that's great. But if I can get children of better genes, twice as good. Have my cake and eat it too. So anyway, so in this study, Larson et al. Using luteinizing hormone test ovulation. And what they found was that women whose partners were relatively low in sexual desirability felt less close to their partner and were more critical of their partner's faults on high fertility days of the cycle just prior to ovulation compared to low fertility days of the cycle, which that's kind of incredible. But then add that to this, women whose partners were relatively high in sexual desirability felt closer to their partner and more satisfied with the relationship on high than on low fertility days of the cycle. So that's incredible stuff, right?
That is crazy. No, I don't have any comment to that.
Yeah. So
I don't know, hit the gym, man. Was that
exactly?
Keep yourself.
Yeah, but but hit the gym, and I think there's all kinds of things like that that men can do to try and keep their partners more interested.
And of course, that knife slices both ways too, right?
Yeah, sure it slices both ways. But as we've established, men are a little more up to just total strangers, right? And and men don't have this, don't have the changing effect of the ovulatory cycle, right? In fact, but the male hormones are important. I'll just say something about that. Is that I can't remember. It's like either 40 or I think it's 40, but I could be wrong. It could be 20 times the amount of testosterone that women have, right? So whatever it is, it's way more testosterone than women have. But it turns out that male horny is probably hugely driven by testosterone. And one way studies, actually a couple studies on transsexuals, people who are transitioning from female to male, or to the extent that you can make such a transition, and like over 70% of them report that once they started receiving their testosterone shots, then their horniness went up dramatically. Their desire for sex went up dramatically. So even though males don't have a cycle affecting their hormones the way women do, clearly there's sexual proclivity or horniness of males as well.
Right.
So hormones is playing a role on both sides of this. So, so this is sort of summary statement. So these differences in short-term strategies have been replicated both in survey analysis and a variety of kinds of studies of extra pair mating, sexual fantasies, pornography consumption, prostitution consumption, effective reactions to short-term mating, and in fundamental differences between mating psychologies of gay males and lesbians. And across all these different kinds of studies, we find the same thing. We find this males are far more up to casual sex, to multiple sexual than our females. Now I want to also, I actually have one last point I want to make about about some of the research that I think is pretty fascinating. But actually, you know what? Maybe it makes more sense. Let me jump to that, and then I'll come back to the point I was going to make a moment ago, which maybe the point that I should wrap up this sort of brief survey of the literature. So going back to that Schmidt paper 5 that I mentioned earlier, that paper is called Sociosexuality from Argentina. So remember, that's like 50 different countries, 100 different languages, right? So it's really extensive. So what they conclude, what Schmidt, and actually I think he had a co-author, I can't remember the co-author's name. So what they conclude is that around the world, men who score higher on self-esteem scales tend to engage in more short-term mating strategies. On the other hand, there was a paper in 1999 by, I'm not sure about the names here, Midcock and Bailey, because what distinguishes women with unusually high number of sex partners. And what they conclude is that women with high self-esteem were more likely to pursue monogamous long-term mating strategies. Right. So, I mean, that's fascinating. Right. So, I mean, and they do in these studies, they do try to control for narcissism. Right. But, if you get to the degree that high self-esteem is a good indicator of one's awareness of one's own mate on the mate market. Right. Those who realize they have the highest value on the mating market, if they're men, basically you have to, if you want to mate with the people who have the highest mating value and know they have the highest mating value, then basically you have to compromise to what their sexual preferences are. And if you're a female that wants to be with high value male, then you basically have to be prepared to engage in his, take part in his tendency towards short-term multiple partner mating strategies. Whereas if you want to mate with a female with high value and aware of her high value, you have to engage in long-term. I mean, I think that to me is almost like the killer in all of this, right?
Right.
So it's pretty incredible stuff. But anyway, I did want to just say a word before I turn away from all this research, and I'll stop all this talking and allow you, if you have anything to throw in, because I know I've been monopolizing the thing. It's one of, we talked about this in a previous episode, Heather. There may be days where one of us feels like we want to grind an axe, and obviously this is my axe grinding day. So, of course, from people and of the BBC blog posts did refer to this as being socially constructed, a product of culture, and blah blah blah, right? So, I mean, when you find these findings, and I've just cited one or two as national multicultural studies, right? To look at this stuff around the world. I mean, David Buss first did this back in the 80s, I think, right? Looked at dozens and dozens of these different cultures and societies. Like, this has been going on for a long time. And when you find all this these patterns consistently repeating themselves. And yes, I'm not going to, there may be like the Himba or somebody, might be some exception somewhere, but when the overwhelming extent of the evidence shows that you have these differences in sexual strategies between males and females. First of all, it's hard to claim that, you know, how can you claim that it's socially constructed when every society you look at, you know, like agricultural societies and industrial societies and rich societies and poor societies and secular societies and theological or theistic societies, or, you know, hunter-gatherer society, when you look, you know, all of this place, you find these same findings. Like, how is it possible that all these same societies are producing the exact same outcomes? I mean, that seems pretty bizarre. If it was socially constructed, you expect to find this vast range of differences, I would assume. So it's kind of weird that. But even if you accept that, even if you say, okay, whatever, you know, ignore that. There's still the question of, like, if it's socially constructed, if it's a process, if it's a product of social processes, why is it that men and women are so susceptible to these so-called social forces, right? Why is it that this is the idea that we have of masculinity and that this is the idea that we have of femininity, right? Why do men and women so easily apparently fall into these socially constructed sex roles? Right? I mean, it's not, you know, it actually requires an explanation. To simply say that it's socially constructed or it's, you know, some cultural conditioning or something, actually is an explanation of nothing, right? So, right. I mean, you know, how do you explain, what is the mechanism for this and what is driving it? And the thing is, I mean, there's no really, in the sort of the social constructionist, cultural relativist type argument, there's really nothing that explains this that doesn't fall back upon biological explanations. But in biology, we don't need this intermediary step, right? We already have a mechanism, right? The mechanism is, you know, evolutionary selection. And we already have a driver, which is differential parental investment, right? We have the explanation in biology to go to these convoluted sort of social explanations to provide some kind of understanding of why these differences are so consistently found across society. It just doesn't, the social cultural argument simply doesn't seem to really provide anything of value in terms of an explanation, whereas the biology stuff has always been there and has always, you know, provided the explanation. So that's it. I've done my rant. I'm sorry I apologize to everyone, including Patricia and everyone watching, for having monopolized this as much as I have. But as you can tell, I'm really annoyed by this kind of thing, because we see it everywhere. This kind of arguments against biology wrong, science is wrong. Everyone's really the same sort of thing. And there's all kinds of other, you know, points you can make about this stupid claim that, you know, everyone's the same. But this, I just saw this article and we were looking for something newsy and it came across my feed and I thought, why don't I get this off my chest? So I have. So I don't know, Patricia, do you want to save me from looking like totally self-indulgent and tell me something?
Well, I'm not going to tell you anything, but when I was reading this, it sort of reminded me just of like a funny anecdote. And I know that you're a Seinfeld fan too. And I don't know if you remember, he had a bit on his show one time. He was talking about this idea. He's like, I hate when I see in women's magazines where to meet men. He's like, we're out there. And he's like, all we want is women. And so the bit goes on. And I think the funniest thing is, he's like, trust me, if you're a woman everywhere, there is a man working on that situation. Now, it might not be our best man. Anyway, so those of you who watch Seinfeld reruns all the time, like I do, might remember that. But I think it just like, it's a good, like, it's sort of goes to show what we're saying and what I think people kind of intuitively know on some level, that there is a truth to our biology and what you're saying. So I thought that might be a funny, people can, I'm sure that's on YouTube, that bit.
Yeah, that's a classic bit. If I remember correctly, I think that was in the first in the first season.
I think so. It's really early when he used to still do like the stand up at the club bit.
That's right. That's what it was.
So,
what it was. That's right. In the very beginning when he did the stand up. That's right. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. That is a great bit actually. Yeah. And you see, and that's the thing that something like that can. Well, okay. I say a couple of things that come to think of it. I mean, something like that can work because even in the face of all this sort of like biology that you get from a lot of feminists, not saying all feminists, but from a lot of feminists and a lot of progressives trying to deny this stuff. That can still work because people, you're right. I think on some level people know that, but actually it is kind of true, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But is it like could the Jerry Seinfeld says that he won't tour college campuses anymore because of all the blowback he gets around this sort of precisely the kind of knee-jerk, I was going to say science, but really reality denial that a lot of the college campus types engage in. So I mean, I wonder, could that show exist? Would it be popular?
No, of course
today?
Not.
No, I mean, like it wasn't that long ago, right? Or maybe I'm just old. It wasn't that long ago that show was on, but yeah, I don't think it now that show could be a success. I don't know. I think it would get so much crap. And I would probably, I wonder if it would affect the writing. I wonder if the writers would change the writing because of all the blow would get on social media. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you see, that's precisely why I think that, and again, I acknowledge this is punching down. It was a trite little article by a doofus little millennial on, website. I probably doesn't even get paid for what she does. But the point is that it's typical of the kind. And I just wanted to take an opportunity to strike a blow for science and biology.
I mean, and it goes without saying, too, that, I mean, I think we come back to this every episode, just because your biology says something about you, that is not how you have to live your life. I, for one, am a staunch monogamist, and I don't care what male biology says about your behavior. I have very high expectations for my male partner in life, so...
Yeah, and of course, right, and of course, one shouldn't more, maybe even more important. There is the emphasis on male strategy, right? I mean, the fact that there's going to be a tendency of males to be more inclined to engage in this kind of casual sex does not mean that males cannot, will not, and should not engage in long-term mating strategies, right? I mean, often that will be the more successful strategy, right? The slower strategy, especially if you have access to a lot of resources and you can invest them in your offspring, and the two parents looking after the children, investing in them, probably give the children a better chance of success than going around and having a whole bunch of illegitimate children, right? Again, sexual strategy is not, there's never an objective correct strategy. This always depends upon the actual circumstances. But in a lot of circumstances, that is the sounder strategy. So it doesn't mean that men won't or can't or shouldn't engage in long-term strategy. In fact, often that is the wiser strategy for men.
Right.
So we should emphasize that too. I don't want to give men, don't want to give people the impression that I'm thinking that men
no
are
hall passes here,
bunch of hound dogs,
Exactly.
So that's not. But of course, we're always talking about science. We're talking about tendencies, statistical probabilities, right? We're not, of course, individual cases are individual cases, and you shouldn't confuse the two.
Right.
All right. So have we buried that?
I think so.
That topic's kind of buried.
I for one love when you have an axe to grind, Michael. You get very animated about it. So that was fun to talk about with you today.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad. All right. So next week, we believe that Charles will be back. The three of us will be reunited, and we have a topic that should be very exciting. That I'm looking forward to dealing with. That sort of picks up on some of the themes that we've been dealing with in recent shows. So watch out for that, everyone. And until then, that's over and out from Reaction Norm.
Great. Have a good day, Michael. I'll talk again soon.
Okay. Bye.